Why had the silence grown so loud? Sarah Whitman lay prone on a ridge of broken stone, her cheek pressed to the rifle stock as if it were an extension of her own body. The desert stretched before her in unbroken emptiness, but she didn't trust it. Nothing ever stayed empty for long. Heat shimmered like water, tricking the eye, teasing the mind. Somewhere beyond those mirages a man was moving, a man marked for death. She adjusted her scope, steady, deliberate, every movement measured. Her breath slowed, chest rising in the rhythm she had taught hundreds of recruits but only truly mastered herself after years of watching people's lives end at the pull of a trigger. 72 confirmed kills. Some were quick, some were not. Every one of them weighed the same in her memory. And this one, this 73rd, was different, because the face in her scope was tied to another face, one that haunted her nights. Colonel Jack Morgan, her mentor, her tormentor. The man who had once shaped her into a weapon, now tangled in a mission that smelled wrong from the beginning. The target today was Jack, not yet. Today's target was a man whose name mattered only to the Pentagon and a handful of analysts. High value, high threat, disposable in the eyes of strategy. Sarah didn't even speak his name in her mind. She called him the Task. The Task paused by a doorway, adjusting his headscarf against the punishing wind. She exhaled half a breath. Her fingers settled on the trigger. The Barrett roared. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder, then died into silence as if the earth itself had swallowed it. Through the scope she saw him fall. Clean, instant, one more tally. And yet, as she packed the rifle away, a question whispered in her thoughts like a ghost. How did it come to this? It was the kind of question that came after decades in service. After all the ceremonies, the folded flags, the missions that blurred together. She had built her entire identity on precision, patience, and quiet obedience. But now, in the baking desert, she felt the tremor of something she had always suppressed: doubt. The mission wasn't over, it had barely begun. Back at Fort Bragg, the air smelled of gun, oil, and sweat. Sarah had walked those training halls for years, watching young recruits sit upright at their desks, their skepticism written in the tightness of their jaws. She'd heard their whispers, a woman teaching us. Some kept their thoughts buried, others let them spill. None of it mattered. Her voice cut through their disbelief with the weight of experience. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't the rifle, she had told them, packing with her hands behind her back, eyes scanning every nervous face. It's patience. It's the ability to wait until every nerve in your body screams to move and then not move. To lie in the dirt for 3 days without relief. To endure the rain, the insects, the hunger. And still, when the moment comes, to make one shot count. Some shifted uncomfortably, imagining themselves in that position. Others looked away, unconvinced. But she had seen the moment their attention shifted, when she laid her old rifle on the table, its metal worn smooth, and asked them to guess how many lives it had ended. 47, she had said. 47 ghosts tethered to that weapon. Respect came slowly, always too slowly. And just when it had begun to fill the room, the door had opened, and the footsteps that followed silenced everything. Jack Morgan. Even now, she could hear the scrape of his boots on the polished floor. At 63, he was still carved from the same stone as the old wars. Silver hair, unbending posture, and eyes that could strip a person down to their bones. She had introduced him with reverence, calling him the finest marksman she had ever known. And for a brief second, she had felt like the younger version of herself again, 26, trembling with exhaustion, staring down an impossible target line while he stood behind her saying, "This is where it ends, Whitman. No shame in failing here." But she hadn't failed. She never allowed herself to, not then, not ever. Adapting, Jack had told her recruits that day. That's the real lesson. The enemy adapts, the weather adapts, the mission adapts, and if you can't, you die. Then he had turned to her, lowering his voice. "Specialist Whitman, Pentagon business, walk with me." And just like that, everything had shifted. The hallways had felt colder, narrower. Jack's words had carried a weight she hadn't heard in years. "Thomas Reynolds has gone rogue." Sarah had laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Thomas, the ghost, Reynolds was legend, a shadow among shadows, a man who had disappeared behind enemy lines more times than history books would ever record. Betrayal didn't fit him. Betrayal wasn't in his nature. But Jack had handed her the folder, the grainy satellite photos, the transfers to offshore accounts. He's meeting with terrorist financiers, selling secrets, information about nuclear monitoring stations. Sarah, the evidence is there. Her hands had shaken despite herself. Thomas wouldn't. There has to be another explanation. Jack's jaw had tightened. What I believe doesn't matter. The orders are clear. They want you to find him and neutralize the threat. Neutralize, such a clinical word. She hated it. Why me? She had asked, though deep down she already knew. Because you're the best, and because Reynolds respects you. If anyone can get close enough to do this cleanly, it's you. There it was, the snare closing around her. And she had accepted, because she had always accepted. Because when you were trained to follow orders, you didn't pause long enough to question their shape. But that night, alone in her quarters, she had laid out her gear and stared at the Kabar knife Jack had given her. His knife, his mark of faith, his reminder. She had turned it over in her hands, feeling the history etched into its leather grip. And she had wondered, for the first time, if faith in orders was the same as faith in truth. The desert sun dipped lower as she sat in her observation post, her gear packed neatly beside her, her mind wandering places she hated to visit. 20 years of missions had taught her to bury feelings so deep they could never reach the surface. But something about Reynolds, the idea of him turning, the reality of being chosen to kill him, unraveled all those defenses. She remembered the day she had first stood in front of Jack, 26 years old, told flatly that women had no place in the qualification course. She remembered the way he had tested her, breaking her down until she thought her body might simply stop. And she remembered the look on his face when, against every prediction, she had hit 10 bullseyes with shaking hands and a body ready to collapse. That look, half disbelief, half reluctant respect, was seared into her forever. Now the same man who had once told her combat isn't fair was sending her into a desert to find and kill a man who had been his brother in arms. Was this loyalty or betrayal? Was she serving the flag or serving someone's shadow agenda? The desert wind picked up, tugging at her scarf. She scanned the horizon again, not for targets this time, but for signs, for answers. But all she saw was emptiness stretching for miles. Behind her, memory stirred. In the classroom, on the range, in the silence after a mission when the only company she had was the echo of the shot, all of it tangled together into a truth she couldn't shake. Something was wrong. She slung the rifle case across her shoulder and began the long walk back to base. Each step heavy, each thought darker. She had taken the shot today, yes, but it wasn't the shot that mattered. The real mission was still waiting. And somewhere out there in the same desert heat, Thomas Reynolds was alive, watching, waiting, setting a stage that she had been forced to step onto. She tightened her grip on the strap. The game had begun. But the question gnawed at her, the same one that had whispered after the last shot. How did it come to this? And more dangerous still, what if the truth was nothing like what she had been told? Why did she choose him? Out of all the trained, decorated, proven shooters in the program, Sarah Whitman pointed at the youngest man on the range, a rookie with dirt still under his fingernails. David Young looked up when she called his name. He hadn't expected it. His sandy hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, his rifle barrel steaming faintly from the heat of practice. The others, older and more seasoned, exchanged looks that said he isn't ready. Maybe they were right. Maybe they were. Sarah didn't explain herself. She rarely did. David jogged to her side, his boots crunching gravel. "Ma'am, you want to know what you're doing wrong?" she asked, nodding toward his target. "Yes, ma'am." "You're anticipating recoil. By your 20th round, you're tightening your shoulder microseconds too soon. You don't notice it, but your shots do. He blinked. She handed him a fresh magazine. Focus on breathing. Let the rifle surprise you. He reloaded, pressed his cheek to the stock, and fired again. 5 shots in quick succession, each landing in a tight cluster at the center mass. He exhaled, eyes widening at his own improvement. Better? Sarah asked. Yes, ma'am. How would you like to put those skills to real use? David froze, hand still on the rifle. Ma'am. I'm assembling a team, she said. High risk, high priority, classified. The silence between them stretched. He was only 27, still wet behind the ears. Too young for what she was about to ask. But then, hadn't she been even younger when Jack Morgan had tested her? Hadn't she once stood with trembling hands and told him, then they weren't strong enough, sir? With all due respect, David said carefully, I'm still in training. Surely there are more experienced snipers. Experience isn't everything, she cut in. Sometimes fresh eyes see what veterans miss, and you have something most don't. What's that? Adaptability. He straightened, pride flickering through his fatigue. When do we deploy? Tomorrow, 0600, pack for desert conditions. Yes, ma'am. Sarah watched him walk back to the line, shoulders squared now, energy simmering. She remembered that feeling. Young, hungry, desperate to prove worth in a world that doubted you. She'd been him once. Now she was the one choosing who would live through fire and who wouldn't. Later that day, she gathered the others in a secure room deep inside Fort Bragg. James Lawson sat on the edge of a steel chair, his arms thick and tattooed, a man whose life had been written in the recoil of countless weapons. He was older, seasoned, always carrying the aura of someone who had nothing to prove anymore. Beside him, Marcus Reed studied the wall map with a detached calm. He was quieter, analytical, his past in military intelligence giving him the unnerving ability to see patterns no one else noticed. This doesn't leave this room, Sarah said. Her voice carried the weight of secrecy that was heavier than any order. We're not on the books. Officially, this is a training exercise in Nevada. Unofficially, we're hunting Thomas Reynolds. The silence was thick. James gave a low whistle. The ghost didn't think I'd live to see the day. Marcus didn't speak at first. He just traced the terrain lines with his finger, eyes sharp, unreadable. Finally, he said, if Reynolds has turned, he won't be alone. A man like him doesn't fall without a net to catch him. Sarah nodded. Exactly. Assume support, assume resources, assume every shadow is his. James leaned back, folding his arms. So what's our leash, CIA, Pentagon? Neither, no leash, no insignia, no trail. That landed heavy. Off-bookmen expendable. If they failed, no one would admit they'd even tried. It was Marcus who voiced the thought all of them shared. Why us? Sarah hesitated before answering. Because the Pentagon believed she could kill Reynolds where others couldn't. Because Jack had chosen her. Because this mission wasn't about trust, it was about control. Instead, she said, because we're good enough, and because we're quiet. The men accepted that with silent nods, though none of them believed it entirely. They knew, as she did, that nothing was ever that simple. When the meeting ended, Sarah stayed behind, staring at the folder that held Reynolds' service record. 26 years. Medals, citations, scars written across every page. A man who had fought in the dark while others basked in the light. She tried to imagine him selling out. She couldn't. A knock broke her reverie. Jack Morgan entered without waiting for permission. He carried an old leather case. He set it on the bed. What's this? She asked. Insurance, he said. She opened it. A Kabar knife, vintage, handle worn smooth by another man's grip. His grip. You carried this in Desert Storm, she said. And now it's yours, Jack replied. Reynolds knows my tactics, my habits. He doesn't know yours. You're the variable he can't predict. Sarah studied his face. You're not telling me everything. He didn't flinch. Reynolds and I were part of something called Operation Checkmate in the 80s, Cold War work. Not all of it made it into the files. I know about Checkmate. Not everything, Jack said quietly. Some choices don't survive in ink, choices that haunt. Reynolds was the best of us, but he carried the weight differently, too heavily. Berlin changed him. Her chest tightened. If there's something I need to know before leading my team after him, tell me now. Jack's eyes, usually hard steel, softened for a moment. Just remember this. With Thomas, nothing is ever what it seems. Question everything, even orders. He left her with that. She stared at the knife for a long time, the weight of it heavier than steel. Dawn came too quickly. On the tarmac, the C-130 waited, its engines humming. No insignia, no marks. A ghost plane for a ghost mission. David arrived first, crisp, eager, trying not to show nerves. She asked him quietly, first combat deployment. Yes, ma'am, nervous. No, respectful. She gave him a nod. Good, fear kills, respect keeps you alive. James and Marcus joined, their faces carved into masks of focus. And then Jack appeared, this time in tactical gear, not uniform. Sarah blinked. You're coming. Change of plans, Jack said. Pentagon wants me as advisor, my history with Reynolds. The subtext was clear. Jack wasn't here by choice. He was here because someone wanted to make sure Reynolds was dealt with, one way or another. They boarded in silence. Inside the drone of the engines, Sarah studied the intelligence packet again. The satellite photos. Reynolds standing in the open desert at midday. It didn't add up. He knew better than to be seen, which meant he wanted to be seen. She leaned toward Jack. This isn't him getting sloppy. This is bait. Jack's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Or a setup. Question is for who? The plane climbed, banking west. Below them, the world rolled out in shades of green and gold. Ahead, desert. Jack spoke quietly, almost as if to himself. Thomas believed in the mission once, believed in it like a religion, until Berlin. What happened in Berlin? Sarah asked. Jack's eyes clouded. We lost 5 men. Reynolds blamed the system. I learned that loyalty has limits. He didn't elaborate, he never did, but his silence spoke volumes. The desert stretched endlessly when they landed. The air tasted of dust and history, as if the land remembered every secret test, every buried lie. They set up base in the ruins of an old mining facility, its rusted skeleton hiding them from satellites and from themselves. Sarah watched her team disperse, David establishing observation posts, Marcus setting ground sensors, James checking weapons. Every move efficient, professional, but beneath it all, a question pulsed. What if the mission wasn't about Reynolds at all? Jack came to her side, his voice low. Your assessment. He's not here, Sarah said. He hasn't been for days, but he wants us to think he is. Jack nodded. So what's the play? We set bait, we act like we believe the intel, we wait. If Reynolds is watching, he'll make contact on his terms. Jack studied her, something like pride in his eyes. You've grown into the kind of leader I hoped you would. But don't forget, every leader makes choices. Choices they'll carry forever. The sun dipped, shadows lengthened, the team gathered for briefing. Sarah's voice cut through the desert air. Stay alert, stay alive. Reynolds isn't just a man, he's a storm, and we're standing in its path. As the men dispersed, she caught Jack's arm. You're hiding something, first the knife, then the warnings, now this silence. Tell me what I'm walking into. Jack's eyes were unreadable. Sometimes knowing too much is more dangerous than knowing too little. And then he walked away, leaving Sarah with the sinking feeling that this mission wasn't just about hunting Reynolds. It was about survival, against enemies outside and inside her own circle. That night the desert grew cold, the stars so sharp they seemed to cut the sky. Sarah lay prone beside David on the ridge, her scope sweeping across abandoned structures. "What do you see?" she asked quietly. "Defensive position, vehicle tracks, disturbed soil, someone was here, within 48 hours." Sarah smiled faintly. The boy had instincts. Maybe he would survive this. Maybe neither of them would. The radio crackled. Jack's voice urgent. "Overwatch, return immediately. Emergency. Sierra Tango 97. Sarah's stomach tightened. Jack wouldn't make that call lightly. She and David moved fast, shadows in the night. But as they approached camp, silence met them. No guards, no movement, protocol broken. "Stay here," she whispered to David. "Cover me." Inside, the smell hit her first. Blood. Marcus Reed lay dead by the comms equipment. One shot, precise, professional. David's voice shook over the radio. "Who could breach us like this?" "Someone who knows our playbook," Sarah answered grimly. "Someone trained like us." On the table lay a single playing card, the Queen of Spades. Sarah turned it over, coordinates scrawled on the back. Her pulse slowed, her mind racing. A message, a challenge. David's voice broke the silence. "It's a trap." "Of course it is," Sarah said, "but it's one we're going to walk into." Because now it was personal. And somewhere in the desert, Thomas Reynolds was waiting. Why had he left the card? Sarah turned the Queen of Spades over in her hand again, the coordinates etched in sharp, deliberate strokes. Not sloppy, not rushed. Purposeful. Reynolds wanted her to follow, wanted her to see him not as prey but as hunter. At dawn, she and David buried Marcus. No words, just stones piled neatly, the desert wind carrying away anything more. Death in their world wasn't rare, but death this clean, this precise. One bullet to the head, no alarm, no fight, carried meaning. It was a signature, and it reeked of betrayal. She hadn't told David everything. Not yet, but she couldn't keep it from him forever. She pulled him aside before they loaded gear into the desert patrol vehicle. "There's something you need to know," she said, her tone steady though her chest tightened. "Evidence suggests Colonel Morgan may be compromised." David's face flickered, shock hidden quickly beneath discipline. "Compromised how?" "Unknown, but assume nothing. Trust no one, not even command if they try to reach us." He nodded slowly. "Orders, ma'am." "We follow the trail. The coordinates point northeast, 20 miles, area 25. His brow furrowed. "The old nuclear test site, suicide to walk straight into it." "That's why we won't," Sarah said. "There are tunnels, I know them." The admission surprised him, but she didn't elaborate. Some truths weren't for rookies. Not yet. They moved. The patrol vehicle kicked up dust as the desert heat wrapped around them like a shroud. Sarah's mind drifted as the miles passed, the training exercise years ago, the one Reynolds had designed in those very tunnels. He had built traps into every corridor, psychological ones more than physical, sounds that weren't real, shadows that didn't exist. Soldiers pitted against their own instincts until only 2 of 20 had made it out, Jack and her. The closer they drew to Area 25, the more the desert itself seemed to resist. Empty stretches of sand gave way to twisted ridges of stone, ground cracking with old scars from detonations buried deep below. A rusted chain-link fence marked the boundary, barbed wire sagging, radiation warnings faded to ghosts. Sarah parked the vehicle under camouflage netting 3 miles out. They would walk the rest. Silence was safer than wheels. By midday they reached the northern perimeter. Through binoculars, Sarah studied the compound. Concrete bunkers, blast doors, observation towers leaning like old men, windows shattered by time. The place looked abandoned, but abandonment was the perfect camouflage. "No movement," she whispered. "Plenty of sniper positions," David said, glassing the ridges. "East side gives clean fields of fire." She nodded. He was learning. "That's why we're not walking in, we're going under." They found the maintenance entrance half buried in rock. A rusted padlock crumbled in her hand. She led the way inside, flashlight beam kept low to hide their presence. The air cooled instantly, thick with dust and the scent of stale concrete. These tunnels were built to survive nuclear detonation, she explained quietly. 3 feet of reinforced concrete. No comms once were deep. David swallowed but said nothing. His silence told her more than words. He trusted her, maybe too much. The tunnels stretched like veins beneath the earth. Signs marked old sections: control room, chamber A, observation deck, but most of the lettering had faded. Their footsteps echoed despite their efforts at stealth. Every sound amplified, feeding the paranoia Reynolds had once cultivated in exercises. "You know these too well," David murmured. Training 1998. Reynolds was opposition force. Jack and I were extraction. Out of 20, only 2 reached the objective. "What kind of traps?" "Psychological." Her answer was clipped. "He'll try the same here." A clang echoed from somewhere ahead, metal striking metal. Both froze. "Settling," she whispered, "or him." They pressed on. The tunnel widened into what had once been a security checkpoint, glass windows dusty but intact. Beyond it, rows of obsolete computers sat untouched, paperwork yellowed with age. "Command center," Sarah said. David picked up a sheet from one desk. His eyes widened. Russian, Cyrillic. Sarah scanned it, unease rippling through her. "This shouldn't be here. Americans only." "Part of the training." "No." Before she could say more, a hum vibrated through the air. Emergency lights flickered, buzzing back to life. Fluorescent glow bathed the room in sickly color. David raised his rifle. Sarah's heart slowed. Someone had restored power. A voice crackled over the intercom, distorted but unmistakable. "Welcome back, Sarah. I've been expecting you." "Reynolds." Her grip tightened on the rifle. "Where are Jack and James?" A chuckle rolled through the speakers. "Safe for now. Their survival depends on you. Sit, listen, 20 minutes, that's all I ask." Sarah scanned the ceiling, the walls, every shadow. He was everywhere and nowhere. "Why should I listen to a traitor?" she called. "Because I'm not," he answered, "and because the people who sent you here are." The words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. Doubt gnawed her again. The too convenient intel, the perfectly timed surveillance photos, Jack's cryptic warnings. "Central elevator," Reynolds said. "Alone, 20 minutes of truth, then choose." The intercom went dead. David's voice was sharp. "It's a trap." "Of course it is," Sarah replied. "Stay here. Find another route down. If you hear gunfire, assume I need you." His eyes hardened. "With respect, ma'am, that's not protocol." "Protocol ended when Marcus died," she said. "Do as I say." He hesitated, then nodded. She watched him vanish into a side passage, young shoulders burdened with more than he knew. Sarah turned toward the elevator shaft. The doors were ajar. The car sat a few feet below. No tripwires, no plates. She dropped inside, hit the button for sublevel 3. The ride down was silent, too silent. When the door slid open, she saw him. Thomas Reynolds. He sat at a metal table, hands folded, posture unnervingly calm. Age had carved lines into his face, silver hair cut close, but his eyes still burned with the same focus she remembered from old training runs. He looked like a man who owned the silence around him. "No greeting for an old friend?" he asked. His voice was raspier but steady. "We were never friends," Sarah said, rifle raised but not aimed. "Colleagues at best." He smiled faintly. "Jack always said you were the best student he ever had. High praise from a man who doesn't give it." "Where is he?" "Safe as promised. Sit, Sarah, listen." She didn't sit, talk. He nodded, almost amused by her caution. "Berlin, 1989. Official record says a Soviet mole fed the KGB. 5 of our assets were killed. But that was fiction. The truth was worse. The intelligence came from within our own government, from something called the Committee." Sarah's heart thudded. Jack had whispered about it once. shadows above the chain of command, choices too dark for paper. The committee, Reynolds continued, was a cabal of intelligence and military leaders who operated without oversight. Their job, maintain American superiority by any means necessary. Operation Checkmate was their work. Sacrifices were made, our own men, to convince the Soviets the leaks were real. And Jack Morgan was one of their finest operators. Her mouth went dry. You're telling me Jack betrayed his oath? I'm telling you he obeyed orders that never saw daylight, Reynolds said, because he believed the ends justified the means. He slid a small drive across the table. Proof, orders, transcripts, membership lists, even current operations. The committee didn't end with the Cold War, it grew. Sarah didn't touch it. Why involve me? Because you're the one Jack couldn't control. The one who believes in truth, not shadows. They want me dead because I kept records. You were sent because they trusted you. Pull the trigger without question. His words clawed at her. Every doubt she had tried to bury surfaced. The casing in her pocket with Jack's cross etched into the base. Marcus dead, Jack's silence. A distant explosion rattled the walls. Reynolds' eyes flicked upward. They've sent a cleanup team, he said. 6 operators, special forces ghosts. Their job is to erase everything. You, me, everyone. Sarah steadied her rifle. Why should I trust you? You don't have to, he said quietly. But trust the evidence. Trust your instincts. You've always known when something's wrong, haven't you? Boots echoed faintly above. The team was here. Reynolds stood slowly, hands visible. Decision time, Sarah. Kill me and bury the truth, or help me expose it and live long enough to find out who your real enemy is. Her pulse hammered. Mentor or ghost, loyalty or truth, the Queen of Spades waited. She exhaled, her rifle steady, her soul anything but. The game had shifted again. And this time, there was no clear target. Why did she hesitate? The question screamed in Sarah's head as Boots thundered closer in the tunnels above. She had killed before, men worse than Reynolds, men who would never be mourned. But this wasn't the same. This time her finger froze, not from weakness but from the tremor of truth she couldn't dismiss. Reynolds' voice was calm despite the growing threat. You've got seconds, Sarah. If you're going to shoot me, do it now. Otherwise, we fight together. The elevator shaft rattled, metal on metal. The team was fast, disciplined. These weren't amateurs. Sarah's eyes locked on Reynolds. If you cross me. I won't, he said simply, because if I do, we're both dead. The logic was cold, undeniable. She lowered the rifle just enough to move, not enough to trust. Where Jack? She demanded. Alive, captured, insurance. If they can't control me, they'll control him. That's how the committee works. Her chest tightened. Jack, the man who had built her, broken her, rebuilt her, was now leverage. The first shots rang out, muffled but close. David's voice crackled faintly over comms. Multiple hostiles breaching from sublevel 2, at least 6, tactical formation. Sarah pressed her earpiece. Fall back, regroup with me. Negative, David's voice was tense but resolute. They'll cut me off if I move, holding position. David. Static swallowed the rest. Reynolds grabbed a carbine from a hidden cache beneath the table. Decision made, move. They slipped into a service corridor just as a breaching charge shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Shadows spilled into the command room behind them. The committee's ghosts had arrived. The corridor narrowed, forcing them into single file. Sarah led, rifle up, heart pounding in time with her boots. Every junction, every shadow could hold death. She remembered Reynolds' old training drills, forcing soldiers to distinguish friend from foe in half seconds. Fail and you shot an ally. Fail and you hesitated just long enough to die. Now the same man who had designed those tests was behind her, his breathing steady, his movements eerily quiet. Why me? She hissed as they moved. Why not leak this to the press, to allies? Why drag me into it? Because you're not corrupted, Reynolds answered. Not yet, and because you understand silence. The press would bury it as conspiracy, but a soldier's word, your word, carries weight. She didn't answer, not yet. They reached a stairwell descending deeper. She halted, scanning the darkness below. Radiation chambers, she whispered. Dead end. Not for us, Reynolds said. There's a ventilation shaft that leads out. Hard climb, but it buys time. Boots pounded closer above. No choice. They descended. The air grew colder, metallic. Rust streaked the walls. Somewhere water dripped, steady as a clock. At the bottom, the chamber opened wide. Concrete domes scarred by old detonations loomed in the dim light. The place felt wrong, like stepping into the ribs of something long dead. Reynolds moved to the far wall, running his hand across cracked panels until he found a loose seam. With a grunt, he wrenched it open, revealing a narrow shaft stretching upward into blackness. "You first," he said. Sarah hesitated, trusting him meant turning her back, vulnerable. Boots slammed into the chamber entrance. Voices barked in clipped commands. No time. She slung her rifle, grabbed the rungs, and hauled herself up. The shaft was tight, reeking of rust and dust. Her gloves scraped metal as she climbed, muscles burning. Reynolds followed, his presence below a constant reminder of both danger and necessity. Halfway up, gunfire erupted below. Sparks danced off the shaft walls as bullets ricocheted upward. Sarah pressed flat, waiting, listening. Reynolds fired 3 controlled bursts downward. Screams followed. "Keep moving," he shouted. She climbed, lungs aching, until her hands found daylight filtering through a grate. She shoved hard, metal groaning, then gave way. She pulled herself out onto the desert surface, the sun blinding after the tunnel's gloom. Reynolds emerged seconds later, rolling to cover behind jagged rock. Dust plumed from the shaft as grenades detonated below, sealing the tunnel. Sarah lay flat, chest heaving. The desert stretched endless again, but now it felt like no man's land. "David," she gasped into her comms, "do you copy?" Static, then faintly, "Holding pinned, need," the line cut. Her gut twisted. He was alive, but for how long? Reynolds reloaded calmly. "They'll kill him if they catch him, or worse, use him." Her fists clenched. David was green, but he didn't deserve this. None of them had. Marcus dead, Jack captured, David hunted, and her caught in a game where every move reeked of betrayal. She pressed her forehead against the rifle stock, forcing her breath to steady. A memory rose, Jack's voice, gravel rough. A sniper doesn't just see targets. She sees patterns, connections, the bigger picture. Don't miss what's hiding in plain sight. She looked at Reynolds. "You knew they'd come, you planned for it." "Yes," he admitted, "because the committee doesn't forgive leaks. Their reach is everywhere. You were my last chance to prove the truth." "You still haven't proved anything," she snapped. "Words aren't enough." He tossed the drive onto the sand between them. "Then read it. Files, names, coordinates, cross-check it, you'll see. Or don't. But every second you wait, more good men die for shadows." Her hand hovered over the drive. Taking it meant stepping off the ledge. Rejecting it meant continuing blind. Before she could decide, a drone buzzed overhead. Not military issue, sleeker, darker, silent until it was almost upon them. Sarah fired, the round sparking off its wing. It veered, corrected, camera lens swiveling toward them. "Eyes in the sky," Reynolds muttered. "They've got our position." The drone banked, released a flare of sparks, signal not strike. Seconds later, dust plumes rose on the horizon. Vehicles, multiple, fast. "Decision time again," Reynolds said. "We run, or we dig in and die." Sarah's mind raced. Every instinct screamed to fight, to buy David time. But against vehicles, drones, operators, they'd be slaughtered. She pocketed the drive. "We run, but this isn't trust, Reynolds, this is necessity." "That's all trust ever is," he replied. They sprinted across the desert, weaving through ridges, lungs burning. Behind them, engines roared, closing fast. Sarah's rifle slammed against her back with each stride, the weight both anchor and lifeline. Finally, they dove into the skeleton of an old test bunker, collapsing behind broken concrete. Dust filled the air, choking. Reynolds peered through a crack. 2 trucks, 8 men, same unit as before. Sarah chambered around. Then we thinned them quietly. Night crept in, shadows stretching long. The trucks halted. Men fanned out, disciplined, scanning with infrared. Sarah lay prone, breath steady, waiting. One man strayed too far, turning his headlamp just slightly. She squeezed the trigger. The sound was swallowed by the desert, the man crumpling without a cry. Reynolds dragged the body silently into shadow. 7 left. The hunt began. Minutes stretched into hours, gunfire crackling in bursts, the desert swallowing screams. Sarah moved like a ghost, each shot measured, each decision cutting deeper into her conscience. She wasn't just killing strangers. She was killing pawns, men following orders just like her. When the last one fell, silence reclaimed the desert. Only the trucks remained, their engines ticking faintly. Sarah leaned against the wall, chest heaving. "How many more?" she whispered. "Dozens," Reynolds said. "Hundreds if the committee wants it. That's why you need to decide which war you're really fighting." Her eyes burned, not from sand but from the truth pressing in. This wasn't about Reynolds anymore. It was about everything behind him. She thought of David, alone in those tunnels, fighting ghosts he couldn't understand. She thought of Jack, captured by the very system he had once served. Her hands trembled as she reloaded. "Then we find them, David first, then Jack, then whoever gave the order to kill us." Reynolds nodded once, agreed. The desert was silent again, but it wasn't peace. It was the pause before another storm. And Sarah knew storms never ended. They only changed shape. Why hadn't he listened? The thought stabbed through Sarah as she crouched beside Reynolds, watching the desert horizon for more dust trails. David was still in those tunnels, still alive, or maybe not. The silence of her comms was heavier than any bullet. She wiped grit from her face, her eyes locked on the faint glow where the shaft had collapsed. "He stayed because I told him to." The words tasted bitter. Reynolds checked the magazine of his carbine. "Then he's either a liability or an asset. Only time will tell which." Her hand shot to his arm, grip hard. "Don't you dare reduce him to that. He's my responsibility." Reynolds met her glare, unreadable. Responsibility doesn't keep men alive. Decisions do. She almost snapped back, but the truth in his words pressed too deep. Underground, David Young's world had narrowed to flickering flashlight beams and the smell of dust mixed with blood. He pressed his back to a cracked wall, breath ragged, rifle shaking in his grip. Footsteps echoed, deliberate hunting. He risked a glance around the corner. 2 operators moved with lethal calm, infrared beams cutting the dark. Their helmets gleamed, faces hidden, every step measured. David's heart hammered. He wasn't ready, not for this. Training hadn't prepared him for men who didn't hesitate. He remembered Sarah's words, "Respect keeps you alive." He steadied his breathing, counting beats. When the first operator crossed into the choke point, David fired. The shot cracked, hitting center mass. The man dropped instantly. The second spun, muzzle flash lighting the tunnel. David dove, round sparking against concrete. His rifle clattered away. Scrambling, hands cut by jagged rock, he grabbed his sidearm and fired blind. One shot struck home. Silence fell. His chest heaved, hands trembling so badly he could barely reload. The tunnel smelled of cordite and iron. He wanted to vomit. Instead, he pressed on because stopping meant death. Above, Sarah stared at the faint dust plume rising from the collapsed shaft. Every instinct screamed at her to dig, to claw her way down, but Reynolds stopped her. "You'll die before you reach him," he said flatly. Her voice broke with controlled fury. "Then what's your plan?" We circle east. There's another entrance, deeper. If he's moving, he'll head that way. If not, Reynolds didn't finish. Sarah shouldered her rifle, jaw set. Then we make sure he didn't die for nothing. The hike was brutal. Sand shifted underfoot, the heat draining strength, but Sarah didn't falter. Every step forward was a promise to David, to Marcus, even to Jack. By nightfall, they reached a fissure in the earth, an old ventilation shaft, half collapsed. Reynolds dropped first, landing silent. Sarah followed, rifle ready. The tunnels were darker here, walls scarred by age, graffiti scrawled in languages long forgotten. Their flashlights barely cut the gloom. "David," Sarah whispered into comms, "do you copy?" Static answered, then faintly, "Ma'am, moving low am." Relief hit her like air after drowning. "Hold position, we're coming." Reynolds glanced at her. "He's tougher than you think." She ignored the flicker of pride in her chest. Pride was dangerous. Pride made you sloppy. They moved fast, following the faint echo of David's shots. Each turn twisted deeper into the earth until they reached an old chamber, its ceiling blackened with smoke, machinery rusted to husks. And there, slumped against a wall, rifle across his knees, was David. He looked up, face pale, sweat streaking dirt. 2 down, maybe more coming. Sarah knelt, scanning him quickly. Cuts, bruises, dehydration, but alive. "You did good," she said softly. He gave a shaky smile. "Respect kept me alive, ma'am." Her chest tightened. Before she could answer, a voice echoed from the shadows. Gravel, cold, familiar. "Sarah." Jack Morgan stepped into the dim light, his hands bound, 2 operators flanking him with rifles raised. His face was bruised, but his eyes, those sharp, unyielding eyes, were still steel. "Drop your weapons," one operator barked. Sarah froze, her rifle halfway raised, her eyes locked on Jack's. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Jack's voice was low. "It's complicated." "Complicated," the word tore out of her. "Marcus is dead, David nearly died, and you're walking in with them." The operator shoved Jack forward. "Weapons down now." Reynolds leaned close, voice like a knife. "They need us alive for now, play along." Sarah's blood burned, but she lowered her rifle, sliding it to the floor. David followed, hesitation trembling in his hands. The operators moved quickly, zip ties biting into their wrists. Sarah kept her eyes on Jack, searching for something, guilt, defiance, remorse. But his expression was unreadable. They were marched deeper into the tunnels, guided by beams of tactical lights. The route twisted until it opened into a vast chamber lit by generator-powered lamps. Maps covered one wall, surveillance photos pinned in rows. At the center, a man waited, clean-cut, civilian suit, calm authority radiating like poison. "Colonel Whitman," he said smoothly, "and Specialist Young, an honor. You've been a thorn in our side." Sarah studied him, mid-50s, expensive watch, eyes cold as glass. "Who are you?" she demanded. He smiled faintly. "Names aren't important. Call me director. What matters is that you understand your role." "And what role is that?" "To remove problems, quietly, efficiently, as you always have." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "The committee hasn't changed. Still feeding lies to good soldiers, still spilling blood for shadows." The director's gaze shifted to him. "Thomas, always dramatic, you were given everything, you chose betrayal." "I chose truth," Reynolds snapped. The director sighed. "Truth is what we decide it is." His eyes returned to Sarah. "You were sent to kill him. Do it now and this ends clean. Refuse and you'll be buried here with him." The chamber grew silent, the weight of choice pressing on every breath. Sarah's eyes flicked to Jack. "And you, where do you stand?" Jack's jaw tightened. For the first time his voice faltered. "Sarah, I did things I believed necessary, but necessary doesn't mean right." The director's smile faded. "Enough," he nodded at an operator. The man handed Sarah her rifle. "Do it," the director said. The rifle weighed heavier than it ever had. She looked at Reynolds, then at Jack, then at David, young, trembling, watching her every move, waiting to see what kind of leader she truly was. Her heart pounded. Was she still the soldier who obeyed orders, or the woman who saw patterns others refused to see? She raised the rifle. Every eye in the chamber followed the barrel. And in that breathless second, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever choice she made, nothing would ever be the same. Why was her finger trembling? Sarah Whitman had pulled the trigger more times than she could remember, against enemies who deserved it, against ghosts who never stopped haunting her. But now, under the cold glare of the director's eyes, the rifle felt alien in her hands. "Do it," he repeated, calm as if ordering coffee. "Prove your loyalty." The barrel aimed squarely at Reynolds. He didn't flinch. He only studied her with those steady, flame-bright eyes. "You know the truth, Sarah," he said quietly. "Even if you deny it, it's already in you. The question is whether you'll bury it or fight for it." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Jack stood bound, bruised, staring at her with an expression she couldn't decode. Regret, shame, a warning. David was shaking, eyes locked on her finger curled around the trigger. Young, untested, desperate for guidance. If she faltered, he'd take it as gospel. The chamber air was suffocating. Sarah's finger tightened. And then she moved. The rifle swung, not at Reynolds, not at Jack, but at the nearest operator. The shot cracked, the man's helmet snapping back as he dropped. Chaos erupted. David lunged, tackling the second operator before the man could fire. Reynolds dove for cover, yanking the fallen man's weapon free. Sarah fired again, taking down another, then threw herself sideways as return fire chewed into the wall behind her. The director didn't panic. He stepped calmly behind a steel barrier, his voice sharp through the gunfire. "Kill them all." Operators surged. Sarah's world shrank to muzzle flashes and the smell of cordite. She dropped one, then another, moving with deadly precision, but the odds pressed heavy. David wrestled with the man he'd tackled, knife flashing. Sarah wanted to help, but two more rushed her flank. Reynolds cut them down, his movements efficient, brutal, like a man who had spent his life in shadows. And Jack slammed his shoulder into the guard holding his chains, breaking the man's balance. In the scuffle, he seized the knife, cutting his wrists free. Blood smeared across steel, but freedom was his again. Within minutes, the chamber was littered with bodies. Smoke stung Sarah's eyes, ears ringing from gunfire. The silence after was heavier than the fight itself. Reynolds checked the door. "More will come. This was just a containment team." Sarah turned to Jack, rifle raised. "Talk, now, no more half-truths." Jack wiped blood from his lip, his chest heaving. "You already know. The committee has been pulling strings for decades. I obeyed them. I believed the cost was justified." "And Berlin," she pressed, voice sharp. His eyes darkened. "Berlin was the price of keeping the Soviets from pushing further west. We gave them our own. I signed off on it." David's face twisted. "You sacrificed Americans, our own people." Jack didn't flinch. "I thought it was necessary then, but I was wrong. Every ghost since has reminded me." Sarah's stomach churned. This was the man who had taught her discipline, patience, resilience. Now stripped bare, he was just another soldier who had obeyed the wrong orders. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. Jack's gaze softened. "Because you were better than me, cleaner. I didn't want to stain you with what I'd done." Reynolds stepped forward, voice cold. "And yet you had no problem sending her after me, using her like the same pawn the committee always wanted." Jack's jaw tightened. "Because I knew she'd see through it. She always does." The tension cracked like lightning. Sarah leveled her rifle at both of them. "Enough. You want me to believe either of you. Earn it. No more riddles, no more shadows." The door rattled. More boots, reinforcements. Reynolds grabbed the drive from Sarah's vest, shoving it into her palm. "Proof. Take it. If I fall, get it out. That's all that matters. Jack moved closer, his voice a growl. He's using you. He's been playing this game for years. Don't trust him. Sarah's chest burned. Two mentors, two truths, both stained. David's voice cut in, sharp with fear. Decide later. Right now we move or we're dead. The door blew inward. Grenades clattered across the floor. Instinct drove Sarah. She kicked one back, dove behind cover, the explosion shaking the chamber. Dust choked the air. They fought like wolves cornered. Sarah's shots were measured, controlled. David moved beside her, his youth hardened by necessity. Reynolds fought with vicious precision, Jack with the raw fury of redemption. Still the tide pressed heavy. For every one they dropped, two more surged in. Fall back, Sarah shouted. She led them through a side tunnel, bullets sparking off concrete. They ran blind, the air thick with smoke, the sound of pursuit close behind. The tunnel forked. Sarah paused, instinct screaming, left or right. Jack barked, left. It leads to the service lift. Reynolds countered, right, storage shafts. Easier to hide, harder to track. Two paths, two men, two legacies pulling her apart. David looked at her, eyes wide, waiting. Sarah made her choice. Right, she snapped. They plunged into the darker shaft, narrow and uneven. Their pursuers followed, but the tight space leveled the odds. Sarah dropped back, covering the rear with precise bursts, every shot buying them inches. At last, they stumbled into a chamber lined with rusted crates. Sarah slammed the door shut behind them, bracing it with metal debris. For a moment, silence, just their ragged breaths, the echo of gunfire fading. David slumped against the wall, hands shaking. We can't keep this up. Reynolds leaned against a crate, reloading calmly. We don't have to, we just need to reach the surface. Once we're out, I know safe houses, allies. Jack sneered. Allies, you mean your financiers, the ones you've been meeting in the desert. Reynolds' eyes flashed. Those meetings were leaks, false trails, designed to draw the committee's attention away from the real files. Sarah's voice cut through their bickering. Enough. I don't care which of you is right anymore. What I care about is survival. And David's right, we can't keep running. So either you start working together or I'll leave both of you here. The chamber fell quiet. Even Jack looked away. Sarah turned the drive over in her hands, the weight of it almost unbearable. Inside were names, orders, betrayals stretching decades. Proof or manipulation, she couldn't tell which. Her father's voice echoed from memory long ago, before she wore the uniform. Dignity doesn't shout, Sarah, it just acts. Her chest rose, steadying. She slid the drive into her vest. We move at dawn, she said, together, and when this ends the truth comes out, no matter what it costs. Outside, boots pounded faintly, closing in. Sarah tightened her grip on her rifle. She didn't know if she trusted Jack. She didn't know if she trusted Reynolds. But she trusted herself. And sometimes that had to be enough. Why did dawn feel like judgment? Sarah Whitman crouched against the cold concrete, rifle balanced across her knees, listening to the muffled boots above. The tunnels were alive with echoes. Every creak, every metallic groan sounded like betrayal in the dark. David stirred beside her, exhaustion etched deep into his young face. His hands shook as he sipped the last of his canteen. How many do you think are left up there? Sarah's eyes never left the ceiling. Enough. Reynolds sat cross-legged against a rusted crate, calm in the way only men who had lived too long in shadows could be. His weapon rested across his lap, his eyes sharp even through fatigue. They'll cycle shifts, he said. Fresh operators every 6 hours. The committee doesn't run out of bodies. Jack paced the chamber, his movements heavy, restless. He looked like a man caged by more than walls. Then we don't give them shifts. We break through before they rotate. Sarah's jaw clenched. We push without a plan, we die. I'm not feeding David to your ghosts. Jack's gaze cut to her, a flash of the old command in his eyes. Don't forget who trained you. She met it without flinching. And don't forget who surpassed you. The silence that followed was sharp. David looked between them, caught in the gravity of two legends colliding. Reynolds broke it. There's another way, old air shafts, crumbling, but if we rig charges we can collapse the pursuit route behind us. Buy time. Jack snorted, or bury us alive. Reynolds' tone stayed calm. Calculated risk, better than a suicide charge. Sarah listened, weighing both. Her instincts pulled her toward Reynolds' plan. Risk, yes, but survival through strategy, not desperation. Jack's push felt like guilt trying to outrun itself. She turned to David. Thoughts? He blinked, startled. Me, ma'am. Yes, you've survived this long. That earns your voice. David swallowed hard, then said, we need time more than we need blood. Shafts, even if it's risky. Sarah nodded once. Decision made. Shafts it is. Jack's eyes burned, but he said nothing. They moved carefully, guided by Reynolds through half-collapsed corridors until they reached the air shaft, narrow, jagged, stretching upward into faint light. The ladder was rusted, broken in sections. Charges here, here, and here, Reynolds said, marking supports with chalk. Drop the ceiling once we're halfway up. David set the explosives with steady hands despite the tremor of fatigue. Sarah climbed first, testing each rung before trusting it. The shaft was claustrophobic, dust raining with every movement. Halfway up, the first shouts echoed below. Their pursuers had found the trail. Now, David, Sarah called. He hit the trigger. The blast roared, the shaft shaking violently as concrete and steel collapsed beneath them. Dust choked the air, debris crashing in a thunder that felt like the earth itself was falling. When silence returned, the tunnel below was sealed by tons of rubble, but so was their way back. Only upward remained. Sarah hauled herself onto a ledge near the top, dragging David up beside her. Reynolds followed with the ease of habit. Jack was last, slower, his body betraying age even as his will fought it. They emerged into the desert dawn, the horizon painted in fire and blood. For a moment, the air felt like freedom. Then Sarah saw the tracks. Fresh tire marks cut across the sand, leading to the ridge. Vehicles, a perimeter already set. They knew we'd come here, she whispered. Reynolds scanned the horizon. Then there's a leak. Jack's voice was hard, or he led them. He pointed at Reynolds. Reynolds didn't flinch. Convenient, isn't it? Blame me when the truth is closer to home. Sarah raised a hand, silencing them. Her mind raced. The director had been too confident, too calm. He hadn't just expected her compliance, he'd expected her survival, as if Jack's presence was enough to guarantee it. A chill slid down her spine. Before she could process it, a shot cracked. Sand exploded at her feet. Sniper. Down, she barked. They dove behind jagged rock as more rounds stitched the ground. David pressed close, panic in his eyes. We're pinned. Sarah forced her breath steady. Sniper on high ground, at least one, maybe two. Reynolds crawled beside her, his voice low. I can flank, you cover. Jack hissed. He'll vanish the second you let him move. Sarah's decision was instinct. Go, Reynolds, make it clean. He nodded once and slipped into the rocks like smoke. Minutes dragged, bullets hammering the sand. Then a sudden silence. Reynolds reappeared, dragging a body by the collar. Committee sniper, rifle still warm. He tossed it at Sarah's feet. Proof enough. But her eyes weren't on the rifle. They were on the tattoo burned into the sniper's wrist. Numbers, not standard, not military. Reynolds saw it too. Identification code, committee embeds. Jack's face hardened. He recognized it too quickly. Sarah's stomach twisted. You've seen that before. Jack didn't answer. The betrayal landed like a blade. All the doubts, the half-truths, the cryptic warnings. He hadn't just obeyed them once. He stayed tethered, even in silence. Her voice was sharp, shaking. "How deep, Jack? How long have you been there, man?" His eyes met hers, full of something like pain. "I thought I could guide them, keep them from going too far. I was wrong. But I never betrayed you, Sarah, never." Reynolds' voice was ice. "He's lying, he always has." The desert wind howled, carrying silence heavier than gunfire. Sarah's rifle felt like judgment in her hands again. David whispered, barely audible, "Ma'am, what do we do?" Her heart cracked. She had been trained to kill without hesitation, but this wasn't about skill. It was about trust, and trust was the rarest currency left. Jack stepped closer, hands out. "I taught you to see patterns others miss. Look at me, you know who I am." Reynolds moved to her other side. "And I taught you nothing, but I gave you the truth no one else dared. You know what I am." Two paths, both broken, both dangerous. Sarah lowered her rifle, not because she had chosen, but because she realized the truth she hadn't wanted to face. "Maybe you're both right," she said softly, "and maybe that's the worst part." The sound of engines roared closer, cutting off her words. Dust plumes rose, more trucks, more soldiers. David's voice shook. "We can't fight them all." Sarah tightened her grip, eyes locked on the horizon. "Then we don't fight them all. We fight just enough to survive." The vehicles crested the ridge, sunlight glinting off steel. And Sarah realized dawn wasn't judgment, it was war. Why did endings never feel like endings? Sarah Whitman lay in the dust, rifle cradled against her shoulder, her eye pressed to the scope. The horizon shimmered with approaching vehicles, sunlight glinting off windshields, a storm of men and machines bearing down on them. She whispered to herself, steadying her breath, one shot at a time, one heartbeat at a time. David crouched beside her, reloading with trembling hands. His face was pale, but his eyes were hard now, shaped by the crucible of survival. He wasn't the rookie who had flinched on the range. He was something else. Reynolds checked the perimeter, calm even with death rushing toward them. 2 trucks left flank, 3 center, at least a dozen men each. Jack stood rigid, rifle slung but unused, his eyes scanning the horizon with haunted familiarity. "They'll come in waves, pin us, then sweep." Sarah exhaled, "Not if we move first." The committee's forces fanned out, disciplined, confident. They thought they were hunting prey. Sarah intended to prove otherwise. "David, cover fire. Reynolds left flank with me. Jack," she hesitated, "hold the ridge. If you're still with us, prove it." Jack gave the smallest nod. The first shots cracked across the desert. Sarah dropped a driver through the windshield of a truck, the vehicle skidding sideways. David's fire peppered the lead squad, forcing them down. Reynolds moved like a phantom, his bursts precise, cutting men before they could rise. The committee pushed harder, rifles spitting flame. Bullets chewed the rock around Sarah, dust spraying her face. She rolled, fired, rolled again, each movement practiced, instinctual. David shouted, "They're flanking." Reynolds cursed, cutting down 2, but a third slipped close. Sarah swung her rifle but froze when the man's body jerked backward, a hole through his chest. Jack lowered his rifle slowly. For the first time since Berlin, his shot had saved rather than condemned. The fight grew savage. Grenades thudded, dirt geysering. Sarah dragged David back from the blast radius, her ears ringing. She pressed her forehead against his for a split second. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay." His eyes locked on hers. "Yes, ma'am." The next wave came harder. Trucks circling, men dismounting, rifles trained. Sarah's rounds thinned them, but numbers pressed too heavy. Reynolds shouted over the roar, "Fall back to the ridge. Use elevation." They scrambled, bullets chasing them up the jagged slope. Sarah's lungs burned, legs aching, but she refused to slow. At the crest, she dropped prone, rifle stabilizing, picking targets one by one. The enemy faltered under the high-ground assault, but still they advanced. Then Sarah heard it, the low hum of rotor blades. A helicopter rose over the horizon, its shadow stretching across the desert. Reynolds spat, "Extraction for them, not us." Jack's face hardened. "Or cleanup, airstrike to erase everything." The thought chilled Sarah. Proof gone, witnesses gone, all buried in sand. She scanned the ridge. The explosives David had planted earlier, charges left behind as insurance. She could use them, but using them meant sacrifice. Her eyes flicked to Jack. He saw the thought before she spoke it. "You'll never make it out," he said. "Doesn't matter if the truth does," she answered. Reynolds cut in fierce. "No, you've carried enough ghosts, let me." Sarah's throat tightened. He wanted to pay his debt in blood. Jack wanted the same. Both broken men, both guilty in different ways. But the decision wasn't theirs. It was hers, always hers. She steadied her breath, the desert wind stinging her eyes. "Neither of you. David goes, I stay." David's head snapped toward her. "No, you can't." "I can," she said softly, "because you'll carry it further than I ever could." Reynolds shook his head. "You'll be wasted." Jack's eyes glistened, rare vulnerability breaking through. "Sarah, don't make my mistake. Don't trade yourself for shadows." The helicopter drew closer, its rotors a thunder in the sky. Trucks regrouped, men pressing harder. The ridge trembled under the weight of inevitability. Sarah pulled the drive from her vest, pressing it into David's hands. "Whatever happens, get this out. Don't stop until the world sees it." His fingers closed around it, trembling. "Ma'am." She touched his cheek with her gloved hand, the closest she'd ever come to tenderness in war. "You've earned more than my orders. You've earned my faith." Then she turned to Reynolds and Jack. "Cover him, no matter what." The men exchanged a look, old enemies, old sins, but for once united. They nodded. Sarah crawled to the detonator wired into the charges. She set the timer, her hands steady, her heart strangely calm. The first squads reached the base of the ridge. Bullets screamed overhead. Sarah lay flat, rifle braced, and began the final work of her life. Each shot clean, each shot a delay, buying seconds for David, for the truth, for something bigger than herself. Reynolds' fire joined hers, brutal and relentless. Jack, too, his aim unshakable despite age. For a moment the three of them were one force, not allies, not enemies, just soldiers bound by necessity. The helicopter closed, its side gunners unleashing hell. Sand erupted, rocks shattered. Sarah's body jolted with the concussions, but she held the line. "Go," she shouted to David. He hesitated one last second, then ran, crouched low, sprinting across the desert with the drive clutched tight. Sarah smiled faintly, even through the storm. The boy would live, he had to. She glanced at Jack. His face was grim, resolute. At Reynolds, his eyes burned with something like respect. The timer ticked down, 10 seconds. Sarah whispered to herself, to the ghosts, to the endless silence that would soon claim her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The ridge erupted. A thunderclap tore the desert as the charges detonated. Fire and stone swallowed the trucks, the squads, the helicopter itself, ripped from the sky in a blossom of flame. The blast shook the horizon, sand rising in waves like the sea. When the dust settled, only silence remained. David stumbled miles away, collapsing in the sand, clutching the drive against his chest. He turned back once, eyes burning, the ridge a smoking ruin in the distance. He whispered into the wind, I'll tell them everything." And somewhere in that silence, Sarah Whitman's spirit lingered, not as a ghost, not as a number in a file, but as the quiet strength of a soldier who had chosen truth over obedience. She never missed. Not the shot, not the choice, not the moment to matter.